We have an incredible panel here. I have the privilege of simply introducing our moderator, Dr. Gershon Baskin, who will then run the show and introduce the panelists. So Gershon has been involved in the peace-building field for multiple decades. He's currently the director of the Holy Land Bond. He's a co-founder of IPCRI. He initiated and managed the secret negotiations with Hamas that led to the release of Gilad Shalit, which he has written about. And at IPCRI, founded the first joint Israeli-Palestinian think tank and do tank. I always think of Gershon as one of very few people who could wear the hat of the dean of the peace-building field. And Gershon, we were grateful, served on the ALLMEP board for many years, helping to guide us through critical moments in our development. I'll just mention also that following the success of his first book, he has a new book out. I think he might even have some copies around here, so you can talk to Gershon afterwards. Thank you, Gershon. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Avi. Before we get into the meat of the panel, we've decided in ALLMEP to dedicate this panel to a peace hero. Many of us who've been engaged in the peace world don't really pay a price for the work that we do. In the last 43 years, I've been arrested 7 or 8 times, but usually I get out after 3 or 4 hours. I've never spent overnight in prison. But one of our friends in Gaza, Rami Aman, was arrested by Hamas for leading a series of meetings in Zoom with Israelis and members of his organization in Gaza, the Gaza Youth Committee, and Rami, and several of the others, colleagues, including Manar Sharif, were arrested by Hamas. Rami was in prison for 8 months. Many of us who were engaged with our friends in Gaza spent endless hours, both in direct contacts with Hamas and with international organizations, to free Rami. Much of the 8 months that Rami was in prison, he was in solitary confinement, and he was tortured, and he had a really horrible time. So we, in recognizing the heroes of peace in Gaza, we dedicate this panel to Rami and his friends in Gaza. So, the Abraham Accords crossed the lines of the Arab Peace Initiative. On the one hand, they proved the Netanyahu-Trump thesis that Israel can make peace with its Arab neighbors without dealing with the Palestinians and the future status of the territories. On the other hand, at least according to the Emirates, the Abraham Accords blocked Israeli plans of annexing the West Bank or parts of it. The Palestinians feel betrayed by their Arab brothers and sisters, and Israel feels vindicated that their continued control over all the land can continue while making peace with the Arab world and not dealing with the Palestinians. So my first question to the panel, and I'll ask each one of them an individual question afterwards, is what do you have to say about that? About the betrayal of the Palestinians and the Arab Peace Initiative, the vindication of Trump and Netanyahu that Israel can make peace with the Arab world without dealing with the Palestinians? And maybe can the Abraham Accords be leveraged for the benefit of the Palestinians? So we'll begin with Dan.
Thank you, Gershon. Thanks for the nice compliment, undeserved, I'm sure. It's really a great honor and pleasure to be at this conference on behalf of ALLMEP and with this wonderful community so committed to peace building. It's a special honor to be on the panel with such distinguished colleagues. So thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. I'm going to only briefly address your direct question, Gershon, and then I'm going to shift to what I wanted to say, but it all flows. I certainly don't deny or dispute that many Palestinians felt some degree of betrayal. The Arab Peace Initiative, of course, had set up a sequence of first the achievement of a two-state solution and then normalization. Obviously, the Abraham Accords broke with that sequence. There were countries who felt that they were no longer interested in waiting to serve the interests they felt could be served by opening relations with Israel, did so. And I also don't dispute that some involved in that decision at the time, or that play of events at the time, may have thought that the one of the benefits of the Abraham Accords and normalization was rendering the Palestinian issue and maybe the Palestinian people irrelevant and sort of putting that issue permanently to the side. It's an illusion, but that may have indeed been part of the motivation or the thinking of some of the people who were involved in it. Having said that, that's not how I approach it. That's not how I think any of us should approach it. That's not how I hope and think the Biden administration approaches it. And I'll say a little word about what I'm working on to then answer this question in a little more detail. I've recently begun a distinguished fellowship at the Atlantic Council, a very prominent Washington think tank that only, its name implies, has mostly been working on transatlantic issues through its 60-year history, but in more recent years has expanded to cover other regions, and including the Middle East, of course. But I've been asked to come and help really run a program on Israel, U.S.-Israel relations, Israeli-Palestinian affairs, and indeed expanding the Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements in the region. This grew out of a conference that the Atlantic Council hosted in October in the United Arab Emirates. I was not working for them at the time, but in a personal capacity, they asked me to come and moderate this conference. And it was the first, and to this day, the only time that representatives of all 6 countries that have any form of normalization with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, officials sat at one table with Israeli officials. And it let us start to imagine what a multilateral regional architecture growing out of these normalization agreements could look like. Now, it is also true that as the moderator and the only real U.S. American voice at that table, frequently I was the only one injecting the subject of the Israeli-Palestinian issue into the conversation. And those others at the table had other issues they wanted to address. And I think we saw an echo of this when the Negev Summit was convened a few months later. Although there one has to say that both in the private meetings and in the press conference that followed, several of the ministers did at least address themselves to the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What we will be doing over the coming months and year in the Atlantic Council is a series of additional convenings to try to build out this multilateral regional architecture. The goal is indeed to deepen and indeed expand normalization agreements. We hope countries who have not yet normalized with Israel will also participate. We will do this in many fields: agriculture, water, food security, maybe the most pressing need of the region at the moment, education, trade, and many others. And we hope to feed some of the content as the product of these conferences into the Negev Summit working group so that when the ministers next convene, there will be some more for them to talk about. Now, there will be a very clear principle at the gatherings we will convene, that at our events, Palestinians will be invited. Palestinians will be encouraged to attend. Palestinians will have a place at that table. And the door will be open for them to come and express their views on the issues at hand, of course, from a Palestinian perspective, and make a contribution and hopefully draw benefit as well from these conversations. Now, I have no illusions that it may be that many Palestinians will say no to this opportunity. Whether it's at the official level or whether it's at the expert level, this may not be a table they want to sit at least not yet. And it may be that some of the other participants will have some doubts about it. I think Israeli participants may have doubts. Is there benefit to putting Palestinians at the table? Maybe the UAE representatives will have similar questions as well. But we're an American think tank, the Atlantic Council, and we think about the U.S. interest as we plan our events, and it's definitely a U.S. interest. I believe it is, and I know this current administration does, that the Palestinian issue, A, not be left to the side, that that's an illusion that shouldn't be perpetuated, and B, that rather Palestinians should be brought into the conversation. In fact, I remember when the Abraham Accords were first signed, and of course it was still in the middle of COVID, most of us were still sitting at home, and almost every night someone would post on their social media a picture of a Zoom screen with a bunch of young Israelis and Emiratis and Bahrainis and Moroccans meeting each other over Zoom. And I kept wondering to myself, why are there no Palestinians on those screens? Why are there no Palestinians in those conversations? That would enrich the conversation, not detract from it. It would enrich all the participants, Palestinian as well as the other participants. So Now that we're out of Zoom, hopefully that's the process going forward. It absolutely should be the case that Palestinians are present at these gatherings, whether it's on business or health or environment or water or whatever it is, to take part, to contribute, to benefit, and to lend their voice to it. Now I know it's difficult, I really do, and I know there is a taboo against the concept of normalization, the word normalization. I think it affects the work of many in the peacebuilding community, that whether Palestinians feel comfortable to sit at tables with Israelis, let alone with others who have normalized their relations with Israel, is putting the cart before the horse. But you know, I try to look at it from a very practical point of view. The way I see it, if one surveys the field about what are the potential influences on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and what I think probably everyone here agrees still must be the outcome to that, which is a two-state solution in which both Israelis and Palestinians achieve their very legitimate interests and rights. There's very little that's going to come out of this Israeli coalition. It's just not built. There are some very interesting and even some attractive features of this Israeli coalition, but it's not built to make big decisions or big progress on this issue. I don't think the current Palestinian leadership, either in Ramallah or certainly in Gaza, is particularly able or inclined to make big and bold moves on this issue as well. So that's why things seem so stuck, and it seems that there are such limited expectations, for example, from President Biden's likely visit. Just one more minute, I'll finish. Because things seem so stuck. But as far as I can tell, there are only two possible sources of energy, positive energy, into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now. One is actually the Abraham Accords. It is a place that if Palestinians choose to participate, they can benefit, they can get their issues into the discussion, they can change the shape of the conversation even between Israel and some of the countries that are normalizing with it. Not as a condition for further normalization, but as an expectation that Israel and its new partners, as they build their relationships, and I will encourage that only to move forward, also include progress and cooperation toward meeting Palestinians' needs. And that there's ways Palestinians can benefit from that at the personal level, in the business level, but also at the level of their national interests. And of course, the other potential positive source of energy is the work of this coalition, of ALLMEP and all the organizations ALLMEP encompasses, is the peace-building community. That's, of course, difficult work, and it's undervalued for sure, but it's deeply impactful, as we all know, and for a change now, it's going to be properly resourced because of the MEPA program that Congress created and that will now really allow us to scale these activities and build the constituency and break the taboos and build up at least a modicum of trust and some bridges across the divide. To me, the most impactful way to draw on those two positive sources of energy is to combine them. And that's really where I think we have an opportunity. Of course, the model that ALLMEP has proposed of an international fund alongside the U.S. MEPA program is exactly what could draw countries in the region, many of them with significant resources, who are in some stage of normalization with Israel, to make their very significant contribution to Palestinian-Israeli bridge building and peace building, also to the Palestinian private sector, in ways that will help Palestinians in their daily lives and allow them to benefit from that, but also make a very significant contribution to doing the only thing one can do right now as far as two states is concerned, which is keep it alive and keep it and lower the barriers to its eventual negotiation when there's different leaders on the scene. So I will stop there for my opening remarks.
Hello to everybody. It's good to be among friends. It's been a while, and moving from Zoom to a real live meeting certainly has its advantages, many advantages. You meet people and you feel the warmth and the hope. So I will start with an old Soviet joke. Lenin once was asked, what is communism? And he said that communism is socialism plus electrification of the whole country. And so the person asked him, so if during communism we will have a shutdown of the energy, is this darkness socialism? So getting to the point, you know, if we will not have now the Abraham Accords, does it mean that we would have more space for advancing of Palestinian-Israeli peace? does it mean that there would be more opportunities for Israeli and Palestinian leaderships and more willingness to move closer to each other and perhaps renew the negotiations? I personally believe that it would not make a difference. Of course, I do not argue with the personal feeling of people who feel that they are betrayed. Because perhaps they heard different promises, perhaps they, counted that something different eventually will happen that will lead Israel to be more interested in advancing peace with the Palestinians. But I can only tell you that I agree with Dan. It's the only bright spot right now in otherwise very troublesome and problematic present of the Middle East. And the only thing that we can do, and I've just written a big piece in Haaretz about this a couple of weeks ago, the only thing we can do is just not let the right wing to capitalize and take over completely the dynamics of Abraham Accords and try to take the initiative into our hands and first of all expand this circle of normalization of the Abraham Accords by joining forces also with the old countries of the normalizations. What I mean is it's of course Egypt and Jordan, which have not been mentioned so far, but they are extremely important for Israel and also for regional dynamics and also for the Palestinians. And as difficult it is today to talk about, with the Palestinian friends, to discuss with them, any possibility that they will be joining along. And the whole term, Abraham Accords, makes some of them already feel anxious. But I can only tell you that it's up to us to reshape it in the way that we feel that it should be done. So a few assumptions were broken, I think, about the Abraham Accords during the last 2 years. We will celebrate 2 years very shortly. First of all, that without Trump and Bibi, these accords will not survive. It was mainly about Bibi and Trump, and it was mainly about the right wing, and if they are not there, then perhaps it will collapse. There were also some assumptions that these accords are very fragile, and every turmoil, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in West Bank, might disrupt them. This didn't happen as well. So we do see positive dynamics. We do see the rapprochement between people. And as an Israeli, in any given moment, if you can have some Jews with some Arabs in the room talking about trade, diplomacy, research, high-tech, academic exchange, and so on, and in every single field, you do have already accomplishments. In every single field, you already have some progress. I can only say, well, let's use this dynamic and apply it for the peaceful means. Because during the last 2 years, I also have been in a lot of Zooms with a lot of Israelis and Emiratis and Moroccans and Bahrainis. And I also asked myself, okay, so what about the Palestinians? I know firsthand how difficult it is also to, with our partners to Abraham Accords, to raise the question of the Palestinian-Israeli peace. Many of them, when they hear about it, they say, okay, let's discuss the history of Bahrain instead. True story. Okay, and this is challenging. It's not easy at all. It's much easier now to find partners for, joint ventures and venture funds and some R&D, in high-tech and so on, than to find partners that will be willing to discuss Jerusalem, refugees, Al-Aqsa, borders, Fatah and Hamas, rapprochement, negotiations, and so on. And yet these people exist. People who sit here know very well that they exist. We know them, we meet them. Bisan will for sure, address it and expand it even more. But I have to tell you that if there is a person who is really interested, you really want to get there, then of course you will not let, these superficial images of just like, okay, let's shake hands and forget about the Palestinians. It's more of a talking point. I have to tell you this. Okay, so it's not an immediate connection that you think about it, but then you get beyond the talking point that says, well, people who signed Abraham Accords, they are just not interested. Can you really say this about Morocco, which is also a part, of course, of Abraham agreements? In Israel, first of all, the Abraham agreements are associated immediately with UAE. Yes, this is the most it's the hotspot. It was an attraction for the Israeli tourists for sure, and so on. But there's so much more beyond, unexplored, unattended, and the truisms of they just don't want to get bothered with that. They left the Palestinians behind. They threw them from the train. Well, you have to somehow get over some of these truisms in order to continue and just join hands and try to do what is right. I will just add one more last sentence about the influence of the regional turmoil that we experienced here in Jerusalem during the last 2-3 months on the Accords. So it was underreported in the Israeli press. But for anybody who reads English or Arabic or both, it was quite clear that the countries who are considered the new partners to peace in the region, they were not oblivious to what happened. And if you read the statements of the Emiratis just 2 days ago during the Jerusalem parade, well, that was quite harsh as well. You can say, well, it's just statements. But actually, you can also say the same thing about Egypt. You can also say the same thing about Jordan. And, I refuse to go with this division of good peace versus bad peace. The good peace, it's what we signed with Egypt and Jordan at the time, although, these peace agreements also did not help us to advance the solution of the Palestinian problem. And the new agreements, just because they were signed by people who, from the other camp, we are not there. We are not buying them. Okay, so I think it's much more difficult than that. And in any case, this ship had sailed. This is happening. Today we are speaking, and Orna Barbivai, the Ministry of Economy in Dubai, is signing another very significant free trade agreement that is supposed to increase our trade in like 5 times. And we reached $1 billion very easily in just first year of this life of these accords. So I really think that it's up to us to just reach out, find partners, do some work. There are organizations, and their leader is sitting there with us. They are doing already an amazing job in this regard, and we just have to do more. Ken Yerbu. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't expect that. Yeah, thank you. So thank you everyone for keeping up with us at this very challenging hour. When I joined the regional work, this was in late 2018, early 2019, way before, not way before, but before the Abraham Accords, there were 2 things that I immediately realized. So the first thing was that this was literally the only thing that I haven't tried yet, right? So I'm coming from a political house. Both of my parents met while working for a communist party, grew up in all these peace activities, peace programs, worked abroad and here, chose to study at Bar Ilan University to learn more about, the right wing, visited settlements, like literally tried and worked with all groups you can imagine. And I lost hope. And then I've heard about the regional approach, and it was in the days where you couldn't really say Dubai in Tel Aviv. It was a bit scary to say UAE or Bahrain or any of that. And then I figured that this was the only thing that I have not tried yet, this regional approach. How do we work? How do we engage the region in order, to build a vision that is built on regional integration while Israel and Palestine are both independent countries and accepted in the region? And the second thing I've realized immediately is that we don't have vision. We, Israelis and Palestinians who work and really believe in the work we do, we don't have a vision. We don't know what are we working towards. We fight really hard to end the occupation, and we want to have equality and human rights and making Israel more democratic. But then that's it. It starts and ends there. Meaning including myself, I realized that on myself. Like I've never imagined that 2 years after I would be sitting with a minister in Bahrain and talking about the future of this region. And this is very dangerous. I found it really frightening on myself, and I've decided to join this effort and build this coalition of young people. So when I say what we brought to the big, we always, when you start to work in the regional level, it's like, I always say, like diving in the sea, and then you discover a whole world, and activists and people, like Xenia mentioned a bit, and then there's a whole world that is happening out there that no one knows about. And then no one really worked with the young population. So when I say young, I mean 25, 45, and those who want to be active, but they don't know in what way, because you're either, pro having relationships with Israel, that is forgetting about Palestinians and just like a bit of what's happening today with the Abraham Accords, or you are supportive of BDS and you don't want to talk about Israel or with Israelis whatsoever, even if they come from the less leftist groups in Israel and move to the UK and really are my partners, but then people really condemn them just because they are Israelis. It's really not getting us anywhere, and definitely not to a solution. And we realized that there is a group of people, of young people who are active and leaders in their own fields, who wants to see a fair solution for Palestinians, wants to see the occupation ending, but also want to see a vision and an actual warm vision for the Middle East. As a Palestinian citizen of Israel, we're also kind of in between these two worlds, right? So we are in between, getting into the population, being a part of the society, and in between fighting everything around us. So we can wake up one day feeling, being totally resistant to everything that is happening around us, and wake up the other day and being a part of the population, trying to get in order with everything that is happening around us. And there is nothing that really took us also in consideration as like this, I don't know if we to call it a third group, but a third part. And ALLMEP have here the regions, it says they are the region's largest and fastest growing network of peace builders. But how do we include peace builders who are also living in Jordan and in Egypt and in the Gulf countries, and really expand this coalition and put pressure on everything that is happening and on the conflict? During the war last year, so I live in Ramleh, I'm from Ramleh, and we had a terrible situation, and I started to get a lot of phone calls from my Jewish friends telling me, don't worry, we are on your side. And I was like, you're not on my side, we are both on the same side. Like, it's not Jews against Arabs, Palestinians against Israelis, it's us in the room here against those who want to maintain the status quo. So it's just like the way we look at things is just not right. One of the things that is really important for us and for our work, and that we're trying to make people understand, is that the Abraham Accords happened. Sorry, I didn't mention that. Abraham Accords happened, and we were all in shock. And when you are in shock, it's normal not to want to engage or to do or like to talk to anyone. I was, in the middle of the regional work trying to promote the Arab Peace Initiative, and then the Abraham Accords happened, and then all our strategy could just go to trash because it didn't mean anything anymore. And we were really struggling with the next steps. But then it's also important to understand that as a person who is engaged with the UAE and with Bahrain and with local leaders and like the country leaders, like I want to say 90% of them really wants to see an actual fair solution here, and to push these people away just does not make any sense for us, neither getting us anywhere in Israel and Palestine. It's really important to engage and to really try to use this power that is happening and the power of these people towards our goal, and not to push all the. I'm not even mentioning governments, like even activists who really wants to be a part of everything that is happening here. It's very important to look at them as allies and to actually expand this coalition of peace builders. It's also important to not forget that the Abraham Accords are not sustainable as long as there is a conflict. The next war we're going to have is going to shake the Abraham Accords. They are very one-sided. They are it's impossible to basically strengthen the Abraham Accords without solving the conflict and ending the occupation. So this is something that the right also has to understand, that it's not only us who wants to, complete the Abraham Accord, but it's something that if we don't solve the conflict, it's not going to be sustainable. I was in London last month and spoke at an event there, and there was a question of someone who said, yeah, but the Abraham Accords, they are not reversible. And I was like, of course they are. COVID happened, just like now, the whole world changed. We saw unbelievable things happening. Everything could happen. If there is something that is making me hopeful, is that things could change. Abraham Accords happened, COVID happened. I'm 29, I don't even remember any other prime minister in Israel or any kind of different leadership in Palestine, and suddenly the government is changing, the whole world is changing, so maybe this part only gave us some hope that things are not, things change, things could change, and we can definitely be part of this change. I think the most important thing also maybe I'll conclude with that, is that it's really important to understand that without an actual vision, an actual warm vision, it's just we're wasting our time and our resources. It's very dangerous that young people, or people in general, in Israel and Palestine, don't have a vision for their future. This is, I think, was really something that it's important to understand. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Talking about betrayal with the Abraham Accords, I think there was a betrayal, but it's not the Emiratis toward Palestinians, it's the Palestinian leadership towards the people. How can we as Palestinians afford boycotting relation with Emirates for 10 years because only Emirates hosted one person, one Palestinian person that Abbas does not like? We have paid a heavy price. We cannot expect good friends like Emirates, and Emirates has been historically, until now, if you go and see how Emirates votes when it comes to resolutions related to the Palestinian cause inside the UN. If you see statements from His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah, for example, towards Jerusalem, towards everything that is related to the Palestinians. Emirates is a very close friend to Palestinians. But we have boycotted relation with the most important and the most dynamic country in the region, in the Gulf. A country that now is seen by her leadership as the most important country in managing regional relations. Emirates now is not only involved very much in the Middle East, it's also very involved in Africa, in everywhere. We have committed a lot of mistakes. I think the Palestinian people, or the leadership, the Palestinian leadership, has been very naive, very poetic in its reaction towards the Abraham Accord. They were not very diplomatic, but simply they don't care, because currently the Palestinian leadership is not attached by the Palestinian street, not attached to any aspect of the Palestinian cause. What is keeping them in power is that they need to maintain their business interest, the business interest that is related to Abbas and his family. That's what they are there. Are they really caring about what's happening in Jerusalem? I think the Palestinian leadership is acting in against to the interests of Palestinians in Jerusalem. Now we are talking about recently what's happening in Jerusalem. So there is a lot of lessons to be learned. I believe that Emirates, any other countries, is a sovereign country. We should respect its decision. And we should see the other half of the glass. We should see that now we have a very close friend that managed to win the hearts and the minds of the Israelis and the Americans. And we need to strengthen the relation with this friend. We need to go there and tell them, listen, good, now you are a superstar everywhere in Tel Aviv, in Washington, D.C. Everybody likes you, everybody wants you, everybody. Let's try to see how can this help us. So I think in the Abraham Accords, our leadership has denied us to seize such a situation. I wouldn't have recommended Emirates to sign an agreement alone with Israel. But it's not up to me. They are a sovereign country. They have decided to do so. They did not consult to the Palestinians because the Palestinians boycotted them for 10 years. And we are now in a situation that, okay, I agree that Palestinians should join the Abraham Accord, the process. It could help us, because I don't think a bilateral negotiation between us and Israelis will lead to anywhere. Israel is 100 or 1,000 times more strong than us in military aspects, in economy aspects. And when such an equality of balance of power on a negotiation table, I don't think any negotiation process will lead anywhere. How can we negotiate with such, with a nuclear power in front of us? We say something, they say no, and that's it. They close the books, and this will not lead us anywhere. But a regional process involving the Emiratis, and now we have some signals that maybe the Saudis are coming. And if the Saudis are coming, it's our time now to bring again the Palestinian issue on the top of the international agenda. Because maybe the internal situation in Saudi Arabia is a little bit different than Emirates. Emirates is a very stable country. If you have witnessed what has happened 2 weeks ago, in 3 minutes, the power passed to Sheikh Mohammed. In 3 minutes, the heads of the 7 Emirates met and told him, we elect you, congratulations. So it's a very stable country. But Saudi Arabia is a different story. For the Saudis to sign with the Israelis, they need to have a serious progress with the Palestinians. They cannot simply send us under the wheels of the buses. And this is an opportunity for us. But where is the problem, Ambassador? The problem is our leadership. We need to change them. Without changing the current Palestinian leadership, nothing will move. The Palestinian issue will continue to be dead. And we are not able to have election because Abbas canceled it. And he has the ultimate support of the Americans and the Israelis. The Israeli intelligence, the Shin Bet, and the CIA wants him to stay there. Wants him to stay there because they are afraid of any change. They don't want to risk any change. What imposed the recent Palestinian election in 2006 was Condoleezza Rice. She said she wants election, and they forced election. And if the international community, if the Americans do not force the election of Abbas, he will not do it. And we will keep stuck, all of us. And I can see that neither the Palestinian leadership nor the Israeli leadership, which is a very weak, encouraged leadership, are really caring about counting the victims of both sides. Our leadership in Ramallah wants to count their bank account every day, and your leadership here in Jerusalem wants to count only how many members of the Knesset are left every day. And nobody really cares about victims from here and there. The cornerstone for a change in the Middle East, for the Abraham Accord to expand, to include Palestinian, is having the elections, the Palestinian elected, changing the Palestinian leadership. And Hamas will not win this election. We know it for fact. Hamas will lose this election. Abbas will lose it, but not Fatah. The other Fatah, the Fatah that is led by Mohammed Dahlan, by Marwan al-Barghouti, by Nasser al-Qudwa, this Fatah will have the trust of the street. Those who have voted for Hamas in Birzeit University have voted under the slogan, anybody but not Abbas. It's like anybody but not Bibi. This was the vote. They voted to Hamas to show their hatred to Abbas, their criticism to Abbas. 80% of the Palestinian people are asking this man to go home. And they are saying he's corrupt. And nobody is doing anything. Still Blinken talk to him. They visit to him. I don't know what do they talk when they go to him. He's irrelevant. He does not control the street. He does not control the escalation of Hamas. And they still meet him. Maybe, as a lot of diplomats have explained to me, it's out of protocol. They need to go there. They know he is irrelevant. There is nothing to discuss with him, but it's out of protocol. So I think the most important step that we need to have is the Palestinian election. A progressive, liberal, pragmatic, modern, moderate leadership will come out of this election. We are sure. When people like Hamad Dahlan and Marwan Barghouti. I know these names maybe are not very popular, especially among Israelis, but a coalition like this, with maybe Jibril Joub that is upset from Dahlan, and figures like Nasser Khudwa and Salam Fayyad, these people can coalesce together. With a certain budget, we will win Hamas. There is no other solution for Hamas. Israel has tried several solutions, military and others. We have confronted Hamas in 2007 in Gaza also. You cannot confront Hamas. The only way to beat the current leadership in Ramallah and Gaza is elections. We need election box, and I know your voice is heard in Washington, D.C. You need to trust that the Palestinians need a change in leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the good things about ALLMEP is that it brings organizations that work under whatever political conditions we have. And you know, in Israel we had so many difficult years of political leadership that didn't want to make peace, and still we had NGOs on the ground working despite the political hardships, trying to build the bridges and to make the connection. I think that could be done probably in the Palestinian civil society as well, until you have the political condition that you wish for, and good to have a Palestinian representative of such organization working for that. At Mitvim, when we work on the regional element, we very closely link it to the Palestinian issue, and we found a lot of the problems that we already mentioned in this panel evident in our work. Because there's a lot of potential in linking regional affairs to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. We saw it in the past. The linkage goes both ways, by the way. When Israel moved forward towards peace with its Palestinian neighbors, immediately there were positive benefits in the regional level. After Madrid, after Oslo, even after disengagement, although it wasn't a pro-peace step. When Israel had relations with regional countries, those relationships eventually were helpful to efforts to advance peace when they happened. Think about Egypt and the role it played in mediating. Think about Jordan, the role of both the current and the previous kings in peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. Remember King Hussein coming to White Plantation, and many other examples. Even Turkey inviting Abbas and Peres at the time to speak at the parliament in Ankara. So regional countries can help advance peace when they already have the relationship with Israel. One of the things that wasn't successful was the promise to Israelis that they will have better relation with the region if they advance peace with the Palestinians. And the Arab Peace Initiative was mentioned. We are marking 20 years of an initiative that did not bear the fruits. So looking regionally, meaning also looking into the past, because we had a decade or two in which we could assess what the relationship could look like under different regional conditions. And the situation that we are here today, and I would like to assess a bit where we are in terms of the attempts to link the Israeli-Palestinian issue and the Abraham Accords, is first that we have an Israeli government with ministers who are supportive of the two-state solution, clearly, ideologically, for many years. Those are our allies. Some of them were sitting with us in the same organizations. They are meeting in parallel with ministers from Arab countries. They are traveling to Arab capitals. They are meeting with their Palestinian counterparts as well. They are not making the linkage. Okay, they are from our camp. Think about the Israeli ministers from Labor, from Meretz, who are meeting their Palestinian counterparts. Think whether they are doing the job in making the linkage. And then ask yourself, what is the role of civil society in pushing them to do this? Because in principle, they are supportive of that. In practice, it's not happening. We have the pro-peace NGOs, members of ALLMEP and of other umbrella organizations that are disengaging from Abraham Accords. And Ksenia wrote a wonderful article in Haaretz just about that. Why does the pro-peace community not engage, not put many efforts in trying to reach out to partners in the Abraham Accords countries? And some of them ideologically do not want so. Some find it difficult to do. They do not have resources, they do not have access, they do not have connections. Others oppose it, and that opposition should be really much challenged. Then we have the Palestinians who are being excluded. You know, look at the Jordan, UAE, Israel, electricity, water deal that was conceived by EcoPeace at the beginning, including the Palestinians. In practice, when this idea moved from paper to reality, the Palestinians were not there. Palestinians are also not on the agenda of the Negev Summit, not of the summit itself, not of the working groups that was established later on. The Palestinians are also blocking the UAE. Those of you following the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum know that the Palestinian Authority blocked the UAE from having an observer status. So the blocking is going both ways. And when the UAE is signing today a free trade agreement with Israel, and when Saudi Arabia is moving forward in economic ties, probably this week in some capacity or another, the Palestinian issue is totally not there. Okay, good to have you. And even, with the tensions in Jerusalem, you see the Gulf state take quite a mild action. The harsh statements are basically what they need to say, sleep service, it's not going beyond. So everybody is kind of okay with this situation from all sides. We got to this situation because for the Gulf states, it's not a priority. And we speak with them and we speak with people there, and we did all these Zoom meetings, and we tried to convince them, why not speak about the Palestinian issue? Why not bring some Palestinian partners to the discussions? It's not a priority because they don't see it as an integral part of their efforts to establish ties with Israel. Some of them do not want to alienate the Israeli government to convey a message that this is not a wanted area to go through. Some are waiting for messages coming from Washington. They want the US to push them to go there. Dan, we hope you got the appointment of the special envoy, which you didn't, but you're doing the good things from the Atlantic Council, which is good as well. So even the EU, which speaks this language, doesn't really deliver. So there aren't many actors on the region that really care about this issue and are motivated to go there. That's the space civil society has, and I will conclude by mentioning some opportunities that could be done. First, utilize the government that we still have until it's gone. Okay, let's work as organizations vis-a-vis our partners in the government to make sure they take action to leverage Abraham Accords to peacemaking with the Palestinians. Then there are issues on civil society and mutual perceptions. MEPA funding, why not apply with partners from the Gulf and partners with the Palestinian Authority? It's a chance to innovate, to create new connections. Perhaps a spillover of the positive perceptions that Israelis now gradually have of Arabs because they are traveling to Rabat, to Abu Dhabi, to Manama. Maybe that could also serve perception of the Palestinian area as well. And utilize the countries. There are regional countries that care about the Palestinian issue. Ksenia mentioned Morocco. We can talk about Jordan and Egypt. Now we have better ties with Turkey. Those are countries that want to play a role on promoting Israeli-Palestinian peace, and they could be given a role. They could be given a space to implement, to influence, to make a positive impact. Definitely a change in Palestinian leadership will change not only the Palestinian perception, but also the willingness of Gulf states to pitch in. I foresee the UAE investing a lot in the Palestinian issue in order to shape the next Palestinian leadership. And we have to take into account other regions as well, whether it's the European Union with its new agenda for the Mediterranean that looks at different connectivity between Abraham Accords, Palestinians, Israelis, and whether it's the Mediterranean arena in which Israel and Palestine, yes, Palestine are equally represented, whether in the Union for the Mediterranean or the Gaz Forum agreed by the Israeli government to be recognized as a state. Okay, this is not happening anywhere but the Mediterranean. So there are opportunities out there. The fact that this linkage is not happening now doesn't mean that it cannot happen. And when there is no motivation on the official level, that's where civil society has an important role. And that's a space all of you should be kind of going to work the day after tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, I've been instructed to close down the panel. I really wanted to take questions from the audience, but I have to follow the orders of ALLMEP. What I do want to conclude, and I think that Nimrod's conclusion is brilliant, and it's exactly pointed at us. For those of you who know me, I'm an advocate of secret back channels, and I will tell you without giving details that at least one leader in one of the Abraham Accords countries, the leader, the king, has offered the good services of that country for meetings to take place at the regional level. Years ago, I talked about creating a regional quartet of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt. The countries immediately surrounded the conflict. That circle can now be expanded to include the other Abraham Accord countries. We should not forget about the importance of Egypt and Jordan in whatever we do, but there are lots of opportunities for us in the civil society framework to move ahead where the politicians are too slow, before the political leadership in Palestine changes, before there's an Israeli government willing to take political action, before the regional forums open up at the official political level, there is room for us as civil society to act. But the key for doing that is first to have the trust between the Israelis and the Palestinians and approaching the regional players together as Israeli Palestinians to do the regional work. If you can create an agreement with your partners, Israelis and Palestinians, you will be more successful in reaching out to other civil society players in the region and to the governments in the region in opening up opportunities for us to expand on the Abraham Accords, to bring in additional regional players, including the Saudis. At the non-governmental level, there are a lot of opportunities for us to do that. And if we have trouble working together only on Israel and Palestine, the regional approach gives us new possibilities. So I think that Nimrod laid out a number of ways of doing it, and the challenge is placed on us, on our shoulders, in our community, and we're a community. As Bisan said, and I've said this for years, it's not Israelis against Palestinians or Palestinians against Israelis. It's Israelis and Palestinians who support peace against Israelis and Palestinians who don't. We are a community. We need to work together as a community. And the more that our Israeli-Palestinian partnership can be real, the more successful we will be in bringing in the regional opportunities that exist for us. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, ALLMEP.